Welcome, everybody. We're delighted to have you in this edition of The Kingdom and Its Stories. And let me remind you again that the purpose of this broadcast is not to glorify or to honor the people that we're interviewing. It is to use their testimony to encourage us to think more deeply about how God can use us as Jesus' hands and feet in our context, the people that God has put around us. And today we have Garry Ingraham, who we're delighted to have you with us, Garry. Thank you for your willingness to join us today. And so
Absolutely, Bob.
people can get introduced to who you are, tell us your story. This is like the elevator speech. You got 40 stories or 80 if you want. But who is Garry Ingraham?
Sure. So I'm 59 years old now. I'm married to my wife, Melissa. We're going on 18 years of marriage next month. I have two teenage boys, 14 and 16 years old. And all of that is really a miracle because even though I grew up in a Christian home in upstate New York, I'm the youngest of five kids. And I really had a sense of I wasn't planned for or wanted when my parents found out they were pregnant with me, and really didn't have a connection with my dad growing up. Didn't have really a great connection with my three older brothers. I stayed pretty bonded to my mom, my sister, and then girls at school, girls at church, because boys just seemed to constantly sort of push me out of the world of boys and men. And I was pretty socially inept and very shy. And so it was just easier to kind of hang out with girls who I was very familiar with. And that transferred into not just from my early childhood, but into my teenage years as well. When I was 5 or 6 years old, some older neighborhood boys thought it'd be great fun to invite me over to play with them after school. And I was excited about that, got over there, and their parents weren't home, but they knew where their dad's hardcore porn stash was. And so they pulled all that crap out and began to show me page after page after page of this filth, and then engaged in sexual behavior with one another. And my mind goes black at that point. I don't know to what degree they involved me or didn't. But all of that progressed. When I hit puberty, I was a porn addict. I realized I was more attracted to images of men than women. I was horrified by that. Again, growing up in church, I knew what the Bible said about that stuff and began to just plead with God to take away these desires. When that didn't happen, and of course, all this stuff is internal, nobody knows what's going on with me. And when that didn't happen, I just believed that, well, God can do this. I have no doubt about that. He created the world, but he must not care enough about me to do anything. And
Hmm.
so that really set in this deep delusion toward God and anger and bitterness that grew over years of time. I wound up going to a local Bible college and left there early when I was 19. I didn't finish. Actually got kicked out because they were concerned I was suicidal and didn't have the means of really walking with somebody dealing with a lot of emotional issues. And I found my first gay bar, and I felt like, you know what, God, I hate you. I hate your church. I want nothing to do with any of this anymore. I'm done with all of it. And these are my people. And it felt pretty euphoric to begin with. But it wasn't long before I began to feel this decay that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 6:18, when he says, flee sexual immorality. Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body. The one who sins sexually sins against their own body. And I began to feel this decay of kind of my inner person. I felt like in the prime of my life, I was an old
Hmm.
man, pretty used up. So there was a lot of brokenness that finally led to genuine salvation, genuine surrender when I was 23 years old.
Wow. So, Garry, what's the connection between your story and what God has called you to do now?
Oh, there's a huge connection. I mean, I am just blown away by how God can take all of the stuff of our past, the broken stuff, the ashes, the shame. Sin is not good, obviously, but how God can take our brokenness and sin, and when we surrender it to Him, when we're willing to be a vessel to give Him glory for who He was in coming in to my gutter and bringing me out of that, and also to give other people hope that if God can meet me where I was at, He can meet you where you're at. That's just amazing to me. So it directly connects. I lead a ministry that is a national ministry that focuses on equipping the local church, not just on LGBT issues by a long shot. Sexual sin, pornography issues, heterosexual brokenness within the church is a rampant issue, by far the majority. And so our message is about, hey, hey, we've got to start walking in integrity. We have got to start walking in genuine vulnerability with one another and practicing James 5:16. Pray for confess your sins to one another and pray for each other that you might be healed. And frankly, nearly every church ignores that passage altogether.
Say what you just said again. I want people to hear that.
Yeah, so James 5:16 is one example. 1 John 1:7 would be another. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, God, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of his son cleanses us from all sin. The truth is, we think we're having fellowship with one another, but when we are walking in shadow and hiding big parts of ourselves from one another, we are not having biblical fellowship. And so this healing that James 5:16 talks about, we mistake healing for forgiveness. When we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Powerful verse, but we pull that out of its context of community from 1 John 1:7 and 8. And so we have to understand that part of the God's prescription for healing and getting out of the messes that we've gotten in terms of patterns of sin within the church and all of that, especially sexual, requires that we invite some community into this mess. And the church needs to be more equipped to do that. That's why our ministry exists.
Uh, the implication is the church is not equipped from your perspective
Well, the
to
church is
do
doing
this.
amazing things on many levels, but when it comes to restoring sexual and relational wholeness, which impacts every single woman and man on the planet, it's not an ancillary thing. No, the church is not doing a great job on those issues. I mean, it's taboo and it's tough to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. You know, the church is the one place that has the truth and has the life that God has given to us and true pathways forward to healing and wholeness. And it's the one organization on the planet that isn't saying much. Everybody else is screaming from the rooftops, social media, entertainment, et cetera, defining what sexuality is, defining what identity is, and all those things. The church is the one place that actually has the truth, and it's not saying too much about it. And we need to change that narrative.
Why? Why isn't it saying?
Why is what?
Why isn't it saying more than it's saying?
Well, I think shame is a big factor. I mean, I think around sexual sin, sexual struggles, those are areas that carry a particularly kind of loaded sort of shame, and also because when you're looking at pornography statistics and sexual brokenness statistics, we're not just talking about men in the church. We're talking increasingly of women, but we're also talking about many pastors. I mean, we're hearing all the time about people who are in high positions of leadership, highly known and renowned leaders who are taken down because of sexual immorality, and they're not really walking in the light with anybody. There's no genuine accountability going on in their lives, and pastors are just as vulnerable as anybody else to these issues.
So, how are you? How is your organization dealing with that?
So, I mean, my wife and I both share our own stories of sexual sin and brokenness and how God has met us in those places. But it's not just our stories. I mean, we know hundreds and hundreds of people that have left the LGBT world to follow Christ. We know countless numbers of men and women who have been caught up in sexual immorality, and basically, at the end of the day, people are looking for love. I mean, we're looking for it in all the wrong places. We're looking for it in some of the most broken places. But that is ultimately what we are longing for and looking for. And what we need is God, but we also need Jesus with skin on. We need the church. We need people to walk with us in these places. We're big proponents of bands of brothers and bands of sisters within the church. And so I travel and speak and teach. I do a lot of online training and equipping of pastors and leaders, and then do full weekend ministry events at churches to help equip them on these issues and to help them understand how do we take the conversations deeper in our small groups, our men's groups, our women's groups, to really hit the pay dirt of where people are struggling rather than just skimming the surface and missing all of that other stuff.
So, give me an example of how in a church that's afraid because of the shame issue to talk about this, how do you encourage them to begin to break that resistance to talk about it, to deal with it?
So when I go to a church and I'm preaching on a Sunday, usually able to do a Friday evening event. Sometimes that's with youth, sometimes that's with young adults, sometimes that's more of an elder leadership training. I'll often do a summit or two on Saturday. and then other events Sunday afternoon. So it's kind of a packed time of really just opening up with various groups of people within the church the truth of what God is teaching. And what I see over and over and over again, what I experience over and over is the lights come on. Like people realize they're lonely, they're empty, that we're looking, Proverbs 27 verse 7 says, to a sated man, honey is detestable, but to a famished man, any bitter thing is sweet. We are full in the church of people who are aching for real connection. And so when they hear me speak about these issues, their hearts resonate. I mean, immediately they understand that they themselves and those around them are wanting something deeper, something more. And that's the beautiful thing is God isn't just saying, stop it. He's not just saying, you horrible, awful people, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Instead, he's saying, no, I've prepared this whole table for you. You've been eating at the enemy's table. You've been eating all this junk and crap that leads to destruction and death. I've prepared a table for you that leads to life. And it's not just about salvation that gets you out of hell and into heaven one day. That's glorious, but it's about breaking the power of sin in our lives today. And we need to do that in community in order for that to be effective. And people resonate with that message everywhere I go.
Well, Gary, let me just interrupt for a minute to do a station break and allow our listeners to know you're listening to The Kingdom and Its Stories. And in this broadcast, we interview people not for the purpose of highlighting them, but using their story to encourage us to think deeper about what are the implications of what we're hearing for our lives and how we might be better hands and feet of Jesus in the place where he has put us to live. So, Gary, thank you for being with us. Tell us some stories, if you would, that would illustrate what this has meant for individual people.
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to springboard off of what you were just saying about just telling our stories. I want people to know when they hear this, the people that had the greatest impact in my lives were not people who had PhDs in human sexuality. They weren't even necessarily in some cases pastors. The people that had the greatest impact in my life were just everyday men, everyday and women too. But I really, because of my particular brokenness, I needed some godly men to learn what it was like to be in a healthy relationship with them, to learn to be invited in my mid-30s into a community of men in the church, which is frankly the last place I wanted to be at that time, because I'm expecting is shame, ridicule, rejection, which was so familiar to what I felt growing up. But instead, these guys who were just everyday people, farmers, upstate New York, redneck kind of dudes, most of them were not professionals. But by them accepting me into their group and hearing my story eventually after I opened up and shared about homosexuality and pornography addiction and all this kind of stuff, I was hoping the guys wouldn't get up and leave the room in my men's group. But instead of that, they got up and the leader pulled me out of my chair and gave me this huge bear hug and said, Gary, we are so glad you're here and you belong with us. I have a hard time even usually sharing that story without breaking down, even now, all these years later. And half the guys in that room got up and stood in a line behind him to hug me. I mean, I was not expecting that at all. And in doing that, in just saying that you belong with us and we want you here, that was the first time I had ever heard those words from a community of men in the church, ever. And so this
You were
began.
how old by this time?
I was in my mid-30s by
And
this
you
time.
grew up in the church.
Yeah, and honestly, emotionally, I was a boy, and the truth is, that's true. What I found as a pastor and as a ministry leader, I found wherever I go, many men, I'd say the majority of men and women in the church are emotionally stunted and still stuck in some early places. I certainly was, but God used these guys to really activate something my dad had never known how to activate, this masculine soul, this masculine kind of acorn that has grown into really this solid oak, this solid tree. I'm so grateful for who God has made me to be as a man. I'm so grateful to be a father to my boys and a spiritual father to so many other men. And honestly, it took God using men like this to, even in my mid-30s, to kind of bring me back almost to sort of a stage of development in my my early life, in my childhood, in a sense, to to give me a chance to redo that again. And
Mm.
and these guys did that for me. And they one of the ways they did that, by the way, is opening up and sharing some of their own brokenness. Like, Gary, I don't know what it's like to deal with same-sex attraction. Have no idea. But I do know what it's like to have a pornography addiction that's kicked my butt for like 20 years. And I'm just beginning the last couple of years to find freedom in that. Another guy shared that he didn't know what it's like to deal with the stuff I dealt with, but he did know what it's like because of his own sexual sin to lose his marriage many years before. And so it's in that identification, in that willingness to share our own stuff. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Most of us in the church are not sharing our own things. We're not sharing anything about what God set us free from. We're hiding in shame. We need to tell our stories more, and we need to be careful not to clean them up so much that they become irrelevant to a broken world and people
Mm.
struggling right under our noses sitting next to us in church.
Well, okay, that's your story. Tell us some other stories
Sure.
that can illustrate the results, the consequences of doing what you're advocating to us.
There's a church I'm thinking of that invited me to come to do a men's retreat. And I'd been at this church already for 4 or 5 years in a row. They just invited me to come back again. And the reason for that is because they understood that we need more than just a corrective kind of information dump of a weekend of really good theological information. We need also to know, it's one thing to know that stuff, but how do we make application of it? And that's one of the things I love going deeper with churches in. And whether that's me or somebody else, churches need to go beyond good, solid information. It starts there, but we have to be able to massage that and learn how to meditate on that and to apply it to our lives. And so we were practicing that in one of these men's retreats. And really, the guys choosing to open up and share things, they've been meeting together for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And at this retreat, they were getting deeper than, by everyone's admission, getting deeper than they'd ever gotten before. And it was in that there was real breakthrough. There was even some pretty deep emotional breakthrough, and Jesus showing up and meeting with people in some really profound ways. And here's the result of that is the men in that church began leading the women in leaning into relationship and leaning into discipleship, and almost all churches, because women, I think it's part of God's gifting and his image in women that is unique from what's in men, of equal value but unique. And women tend to be more relationally connected. But when you get guys in the church that catch that fire and realize, wow, there is so much more for me than this junk that I've been pursuing, the empty career, the empty adrenaline rushes, the sexual encounters, the whatever it is, there's so much more for me that God has in these wholesome relationships that lead me into eternal purposes, and really build up my life into something that I couldn't even imagine that God could use me. Those are the kinds of things, the vision casting, I think, that's so important. But I see churches, the DNA of churches changing all the time, and it's exciting to see.
Do you have a story? Okay, thank you. That's the story of a church. Tell us about
Yes.
some people.
Well, one example of I'm thinking of a family that understood that I and others needed more than just a meal on occasion. That's very nice, but they understood that, what we need to do is invite Gary and some other people into an environment of our home where they can experience not a perfect home. There is no such thing, but they can experience people who deeply love Jesus and are willing to admit their failures and ask for forgiveness and those kinds of things. And they open, and this is huge. Being in an environment like that was very different than the Christian environment I grew up in. I'm very grateful for my parents. I love them. They've gone home to be with the Lord. There's so many good things that they did pass on to me. But I'm also really grateful for the believers that really practiced what Rosaria Butterfield talks about in her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, and in inviting people in to live with them and to be with them in a way that has so much more impact, because you're inviting them into a home environment to get to sit in that and experience the life of Christ. That's so much more impactful than a meal here and there. And again, that's good. Do those things. But I would say that's what I see a lot of where a lot of life change happens is when we in the church catch the vision for what Psalm 68:6 talks about, which is the Lord takes the lonely and puts them in family.
Mm.
It's just a powerful thing when you see the spiritual gift of hospitality lived out in a very real and tangible kind of way. I've experienced that. So many other people have experienced that. That would be another example of transformation, and that family benefits. The kids in that family benefits. My boys benefit when we have people living with us, and we're walking alongside of them through their brokenness. We do that with wisdom with our boys, but it's a powerful thing for them to be able to see and experience and participate in.
You talk about living with you. Are you have people coming and living in your home?
Yeah, we've had, so Melissa and I have been married, as I said, for 18 years. We probably had 2 or 3 years of our marriage where we've not had somebody living with us. And there's been times we've had several people live with us. And honestly, the reason I think that we've done that, my primary gift is shepherding. So that would be one reason, but Melissa's there, too. And one of the biggest reasons we do that is because I've been a beneficiary of living with several different families that open their homes up and experience the power of that kind of community. And so, yes, I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but I think there's a lot more opportunity in our churches for single individuals to not just be out in their apartments by themselves and showing up at church once a week and maybe one other event. And then it's like, oh, God bless you, and I hope everything goes well. And yet, meanwhile, loneliness is just eating at them because they don't have a real family. They're not really the family of God is more than just showing up on Sunday mornings and maybe one or two events during the week. It's something so much more rich than that. And I that's what I got to experience.
Well, that that's that takes a lot of sacrifice.
Well,
Um,
you're right in one sense. There are always things that we bump into. I was very emotionally an infant and offended about everything when I was younger, and so it can be a challenge to have someone like me kind of in your home, and but it was also a blessing. I've heard this from families that have me with them. It was also a blessing for them. It is a sacrifice in a way, but it's actually something, again, I would highly recommend Rosaria Butterfield's book, The Gospel Comes to the House Key. It is something that elevates, when the tide comes in, all the boats rise. It's something that elevates that entire family and shifts their perspective away from worldly things, I mean, not even necessarily bad things, but just the things of life that can drag us down so easily. But when you have several people or one person living with you, you've opened your home to them, and you're ministering to them in that kind of proximity, it really does have the potential of powerfully impacting your life. You have to do that with wisdom. You're not just inviting anybody in, but we've probably had, I don't know, a dozen 13, 14 people live with us over the times that, since we've been married. And it's been a powerful experience of seeing lives transformed.
well, Gary, I'm just so touched by your testimony and the things that you've shared. What if you have a minute? Tell us what would you say to those that are listening to help them um, begin to consider more deeply the implications of what you just shared with others, with you just shared with us.
Sure. So the scriptures talk about the idea of having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And I think one of the ways that we break out of having just a form of godliness or a form of Christianity is by leaning into the relationships with obviously a deeper relationship with the Lord, but also deeper relationships with one another. And as we have relationship with one another, if we have the Holy Spirit living within us, if our lives have been changed and transformed, we're not just having fellowship with the person, we're also having fellowship with the Lord through that person, and hopefully giving that away as well. And so I would just say this: making real connection and being tenacious about stopping just religion or Christianity kind of as is. And I know we all talk about it being a relationship, but then we go on and we don't have relationships. And so this idea of leaning into what James 5:16 talks about, what 1 John 1:7 talks about, what Hebrews chapter 3 verses 11 and 12 talk about in terms of encouraging one another day after day, as long as it's still called today. Does that sound like the life that you're living? And what I would just say is that opens up a whole new world for walking in sanctification, for growing in love with Jesus, and for really being empowered to live the Christian life and to, again, to break the power of sin in our lives and sinful patterns in our lives through relationship. That's what I really would be encouraging people to lean into and search out for themselves.
How can our listeners contact you for more information?
Sure, would love that. Our website is loveandtruthnetwork.com. We do a weekly podcast as well, in video and audio, and that's out on all the majors. It's simply the Love and Truth Network podcast. But people can reach us through our website and would be happy to engage in conversation with them.
Garry, you've been a blessing.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. God bless you, your ministry, and encourage myself as well as those who are listening to think more deeply about the things that you share with us today. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you as well.